Hello devs! In this quick course, you will get to know N8n through several practical examples. It is a powerful tool that allows you to automate tasks using a visual workflow editor. The most impressive part is that you can integrate tools with AI models into your workflows to create intelligent agents. Let's get started. Let's begin this quick course about N8n and how we can use artificial intelligence to enhance our workflows and turn them into intelligent workflows. This is the N8n website. The first thing we can see on the page is that it contains a link to a repository on GitHub. This repository essentially provides us with information about what N8n is. It contains all the code, all the source code is available here. If you are a software developer, you probably know that with this, you can create your own version of N8n if you wish. But the great advantage I see with an open source solution is that we can install it on a custom server. For example, you can create a virtual machine on Microsoft Azure and host your own version of N8n without necessarily paying for a subscription on the website. In fact, here you have the section in the documentation that says Hosting N8n, where you can find different ways to install N8n. If you are knowledgeable about the topic. If not, you can hire an expert, watch YouTube videos that show you how to perform that installation, and even learn about some of the best hosting options to have this version of N8n installed on your own server. Once we understand this, let's return to the main page where we basically have some companies that trust or use N8n for their workflows. Here we have some categories in which we might use N8n, such as for DevOps, for sales, and many more scenarios where we could utilize N8n. We see some descriptions about the product, that the source code is available, that you can self-host it, a large number of community members, and more. Here you have more features about the tool where you can use artificial intelligence. You can also use code. If you are a software developer, you can create your own nodes containing JavaScript or Python code and run a source code node as part of your workflow to perform tasks that may not be actively available in N8n. You also have some videos that show you how N8n works, more or less. We will look at this a bit later. Something very interesting and important is that N8n provides a lot of nodes that allow integration with multiple well-known tools. For example, we can integrate it with Google Sheets, which can be an option. We can also integrate a node with WordPress, for instance, using HTML code, as well as with Twitter, YouTube, etc. We have a large number of integrations available, which we will cover a bit later. That is ready to be deployed in enterprise environments. Here, once again, we have some features of the product. What we are going to do in our case is click on the button that says Start Building for Free. This will allow us to create an account. In this case, I already have an account created, but if you see an option to register, you can sign up with your email account. When you register with your email for free, you will have 14 days with premium features available as part of your subscription. That's what I did. I will show you what the N8n interface looks like. This is the graphical interface of N8n. We see that we have a simple interface. We have a section for workflows, credentials, and executions. Basically, what we will do is go to the section that says Workflows and create our first workflow. Before that, I want to mention that as part of the product features, you can configure the theme. For example, here in the customization section, you can choose the dark or light theme, whichever you prefer. That is the only aspect we will adjust in that section. Next, you can also create a new workflow. You can do this by clicking on this button that says Start from Scratch or Create from a blank workflow. Here, you already have the panel or this canvas, which allows you to add different elements. What are these elements? Well, if we click on this button to add the first step, you can see a section that displays the triggers for the workflow. That is, when this workflow will be triggered. We have several options. For example, we have here when it is invoked through Postman, or when a call is made to this workflow via Postman. We can do that with this node you see here. When a form is submitted, when a chat message is sent, perhaps you want something recurring. You can use this trigger called on a schedule. We have several other integrations. Let's use the simplest one, which is to trigger this workflow manually. Immediately, we notice that a button appears at the bottom that says Test Workflow. If we click on this button, notice how the execution of the workflow starts, and we already have a satisfactory result here. If we double-click on this specific node, we see that there is a first section for parameters and configuration, as well as the output that this node generated, which actually generates nothing, because it's just a trigger that will be fired when we start the execution of the workflow. Now let's click on this button to add a new node to the workflow. Here we see various options, different categories that we could analyze, for example. If we want to perform an action in an application, we click on this first category. Here is where I mentioned that a bunch of nodes available for different services and products appear. You might recognize some of these, like ActiveCampaign, which is quite well known. Airtable for databases. We have, for example, AWS services. We have services such as Bitly, which is quite well known for calendars. We also have services like ClickUp and ConvertKit, which are widely used, as well as THL, Dropbox, and some services from Figma, Gmail services, Google services, etc. We have a lot of services that we could use. We also have other categories here that we can explore. For example, for data transformations, meaning to make modifications, such as transforming an array of input elements to process them and display them as a single element in string form, etc. We also have options to modify the flow, for example, to add if conditions, to perform iterations, to carry out some type of switch processing, to wait, etc. Let's test a node. We'll look for the node called code because we want to test a custom node, as it's one of the simplest nodes. We don't need to configure anything else. It will simply trigger the execution of JavaScript code. We can see that there's an execution mode here. It's worth noting that for each of the nodes, the options and parameters you see on this page will be different. Another important point is that for most processing nodes, you'll have an input section that will be related to the previous node. You can see that we already have the result of the previous node here, which is basically the trigger that we specified earlier. This node will execute, and when it does, it will generate an output. This output will be displayed in this code section. So we will indicate that the language will be JavaScript. I have previously prepared a very simple JavaScript code that allows me to generate 10 elements. It is this very simple code that we have here. We also have an option that says Ask AI. However, I have been testing it lately and it's not working properly, so I copied and pasted the better JavaScript code here. We can test this specific node. This node can be tested by clicking on this button that says Test this step. If we execute it, you can see that the node ran as such, and we have the response from the node execution here. So we have 10 records of different clients here, each with a different address and a different age. So this has already generated a response, and if we were to add a new node here, for example, another code node, I will look for it. You can see that the node already receives all the previous information as input. What I find very practical in N8n is that it provides each of the properties generated from the previous node, allowing you to reuse the information by dragging and dropping directly in the configuration area. We will see this a bit later. So basically, this is the general operation of N8n regarding nodes. Once we know how to work with nodes, let's save this workflow. We return to the overview, or rather to the main page. We can click on this button that says Create New Workflow. This new workflow appears to us. What we are going to do now is configure Azure OpenAI to work with artificial intelligence as part of a workflow. Once again, we will indicate that the trigger will be manual. Here, we will also add a new node. Where can we find the artificial intelligence node or nodes? Well, we have a section that says Advanced AI. We click on this option. At the very bottom, we have other AI nodes. Here is where we can find different categories related to artificial intelligence. For example, we have some categories for memory, some for retrievers, text splitters, etc. We are interested in examining the language models. We can see that we have here some well-known models. For example, those from Google, Anthropic, Azure OpenAI, and OpenAI. I will select an Azure OpenAI chat model so you can see what it looks like. You can see that what it has done, I will close this window, is create two nodes for us. The first node is a trigger type. You can see it has this rounded shape, which would allow us to interact with the AI service or model through a chat window. In our case, we will remove it because we don't want to chat with the model yet. What we will do is connect these two nodes by selecting this plus symbol and dragging it. In this way, these two nodes are connected, so when I click on Test Workflow, the execution of this task will automatically occur, and then this task, which will be the processing or generation of some type of prompt. Let's configure this pair of nodes. If we double-click on the chat model, we see that the first thing we need to do is configure a credential. Depending on the model you select, a pencil icon will appear here that you can select. You must fill in the information according to the service you choose, whether it's OpenAI, Anthropic, or Azure OpenAI. In my case, since it's Azure OpenAI, I need to configure an API key, a resource name, an API version, and an endpoint. With this, it is configured. Additionally, I need to configure the name of the model that you can find in the Azure OpenAI configuration section. In my case, that's what I named it. This is the name I gave it. I click on Back to Canvas, and this node you see on the screen is now configured. This is the chat model node. The second step we need to take is to configure this node called Basic LLM Chain. We double-click, and you can see that we have a slightly more complex configuration here. Basically, it tells me what the source for our prompt is. If we want to use the trigger node or chat trigger which was created by default, and we removed. Since we no longer have it, we will indicate that we want to define the prompt below. Here, we need to specify a text. In my case, I will indicate that this will be the prompt text. For example, I need a list of 10 popular cities in the United States. With this configuration, we have the AI model ready, and the prompt is set. If we click on Approve this step, the node is executing, and you can see that we have a successful run. We have different ways to view the output. We can see it in a table, or we can view the output in JSON format. Here, it's a bit more descriptive because we see the generated properties, which in this case is a property called text, containing a single text entry with the list of cities. And we also have a schema here. So this allows us in a way to manipulate, or rather to input data into the service or AI model and generate a response. Now, you may not want just a text property as a response. You might want something a bit more organized to work with in your application or to process further on. The ideal situation here would be in some way to extract the information in an organized manner or with a predefined schema. Fortunately, N8n provides us with a lot of tools that we can integrate into our node. For example, you can see that at the bottom we have an option that indicates this node requires a specific output format. If we activate this option, you can see that if we go back, it has enabled this additional node that essentially allows us to add an output parser to specify what the output will be. If we click on this option that was created, you can see that we have different output parsers here. We might be interested perhaps in the output parser in a list format. Alternatively, if we want a specific JSON format, we can use the structured output parser, which is what we will be using. Here we have, as part of the configuration, a type of schema. Here we have different options. Here we will indicate that we want to generate a schema of the example of the JSON object we have below. Here we have an example that shows the specific state and the different cities. This is just an example. Therefore, what the LLM will do is take this information and based on the example I generated, it will format that output according to this example to provide a response similar to the input we are giving. So, with what we have done, we will double-click again on the AI model node. Let's test the output again. Since this time we had selected the option for an output format, you can see that we now have a more user-friendly JSON format. We have the name of the state and the different cities that were generated based on the initial prompt. This is a way in which we can improve our outputs using artificial intelligence by simply adding an additional node. So this is the second example. I will save the changes and create a new workflow. You can also create it by clicking on this button we have in the menu, clicking on Workflow, indicating that we want to create it in our personal account. With this, we have created a third workflow. Now, the third use case we are going to explore, or this example, is to create a summary in audio format from a website. Let's change things up a bit here. We will not start with a manual trigger. Instead, let's say we want to share a type of link, share a form for someone to fill out, and generate their own audio file. As part of the triggers, we have a trigger called onFormSubmission, which allows us to create a form very quickly. The great advantage here is that we have URLs, a testing URL and a production URL. While you are testing different use cases for your workflow, you can use this testing URL. When you are sure you want something in production, something public, you can use the production URL and share it with anyone you like. So let's test this testing URL. We will indicate that we do not need any type of authentication, although we could add that. Here, as part of the form features, we can enter information, such as the title of the form, which will be create a summary of a website for the description. It will be enter a URL of a site and get the summary. Now we come to the configuration of the form fields. In our case, we are only interested in receiving the URL of a website, so that will be the label we give to the field, and the type of field will be text. Here we have different types of fields that we could use. In our case, we are interested in having a text field. We could enter a placeholder if we wanted to, and we will mark this field as required since we need a URL to perform any kind of processing. We also have an option that indicates when the form will be processed. In our case, we want to process it as soon as the information is submitted in the form. So if we click where it says test step, you can see that unlike the workflow we had before, we have this nice window which is basically a website, a URL of a website, where we can enter the URL we specified earlier. I will now paste a URL that I had prepared, which is a URL from my own blog. I will click on Submit. You can see that this generates an output. Here we have the information from the form, and here we specify the URL along with the value we entered, allowing us to process this URL in the next node. The next step is to process the website information. How do we do this? Well, there is a site called Gina AI, which is the URL you can see here. It is a website or service that I really like because they give you tokens or a certain number of uses per day without needing to register. It has an API called Reader that allows you to extract information in text format from a website. You can see that to use this feature, we simply need to enter a URL and prepend this URL of r.gnap.ai followed by the URL you have entered. Here we have the QR code request. If you want to analyze how it works, notice that you only need a header type, or well, with the name authorization and a bearer token, which is this one we can see here. If you want to use a token, you can click on this option that says API key and billing. Here we have the available key. Notice that we have a certain number of tokens that we can use without having to register. So knowing this information, I will return to N8n. I will indicate that I want to add a new node. We have a node called Post, which will allow us Let me get out of here. Rather, the node is the HTTP request. We have it here. This allows us to make an HTTP request to a predetermined service. In this case, we will specify that the method will be post, which is the method that requests the service. The URL is the one we saw earlier in the documentation, which is this gina.ai/. Remember that after the URL, we need to add the URL we will analyze. So here we can use one of the values we received from a previous node. We will indicate that we need an expression because if we leave the fixed option selected, it will want to replace the entire URL. We are interested in placing this data after the slash, so we click on expression, drag the value we are interested in from the previous node, and drop it. With this, we have the formation. In case we want to see how this final URL looks, we can click on this button here, and it will fill in the information with the data it already has available. So here we have the well-formed URL. Next, we need to configure authentication. If you remember, we need a bidder token. So we will indicate that we want a generic credential. The type of authentication will be basic authentication. We will indicate that we want to create a new header. The name will be the same as, rather, this has to be header out. Here we will indicate that we want to create a new header. We will indicate that the name, according to the documentation, is authorization, and the value is the one we saw earlier, which is this bidder value, which you can find as part of the documentation. Here we have it. The value starts at bidder and goes until it reaches the final zeta. This is the value we copied as part of the account. Once we have saved the data, we can use the service. In fact, with the information we have, we can directly test if we can extract the data or text from the website. Let's click on Test this step. You can see that the information is being correctly retrieved in text format from the URL we viewed earlier. This allows us to gather all this information, which we can process next. Once we have this text, we can add a node again. In my case, it is the Azure OpenAI model. You can choose whichever one you want. Once again, we need to specify which model is being used, the name of the model. Everything else should be configured already. Here it is already configured in my case. Here you can see that this adds this trigger once again. I am not interested in the trigger. I want to connect it to a previous response because I want to process the output of this generation in the HTTP request node. I want to process this information with the model or a specific prompt. So I double-click on this node. Here I will define a prompt to generate certain information. I am going to enter a prompt that I previously wrote, which is generate a 500-word summary of the following article in the third person. Here we will indicate that the article is located. Remember to select expression. The article is in this property called data, and if we check how this looks, we already have the prompt and the value, which is the text of the article. Now let's test this step. What this does, or what happens behind the scenes, is using the AI model. We already have the output of 500 words from the obtained article. The last step then, once we have the summary, is to generate the audio file. To do this, we can click on this button to add a new node. On this occasion, let's use the OpenAI node so you can see how it looks. Notice that we have many actions available here. We are interested in generating an audio file. This opens the configuration option for us. Here, it is important to configure the account. You need to configure your API key that you obtain from the service. This will indicate whether the connection was successful or not to test the service. Next, you need to configure what type of resource you want to create. In my case, it is an audio file. I want to generate the audio file. Which model do I want to use? In my case, TTS1. And what is the input text? This input text will be the text that will be converted into an audio file. So let's indicate that we want to convert this data called text, which is the output or the 500-word summary, and we can change the voice here, for example, to Shimmer's voice. Once we have done this, we can test this step. After a few seconds, we see that we now have an output element. We have the file name, and we basically have an audio file that we can listen to or download. We have the player here that allows us to play how this audio sounds from the browser, and we could proceed to download this file in case we are interested. This is how we have created a simple flow that basically allows the user to enter a URL, carry out the extraction processing, make a summary, and generate the audio file, which I think is a quite interesting flow. Let's save this flow because we are going to create the last test workflow that will allow us to get to know the agents. The fourth use case is basically an agent that will allow us to interact intelligently with it, even using tools. Let's start by adding a first step. We will select Trigger manually only to have the other options available. Here, we will indicate that we want to use advanced AI. We have several options here. What interests us is to create an artificial intelligence agent. Let's select this option. You can see that we have a configuration for the type of agent we want to create. You can read the description of each one if you're interested in learning more about them. In my case, I will select a tool agent. The source for the prompt will be this default one, that is, I want to conduct a conversation and have the information for the prompt obtained from that conversation. This is because a conversation node has been created as part of the workflow. You will see it shortly. We also have the option to select a prompt if we want to make any different configuration. In my case, I will leave the values at default. I return to the canvas. And I will delete this trigger that was created previously because we want to use this new trigger that allows us to have conversations with the AI agent. Now, this agent is still not configured. Notice that it is missing some components. First, the chat model that gives it intelligence. We select this option. We can choose one of the models. In my case, once again, I choose the Azure OpenAI model. I configure the model. And with that, we have completed this first section. If we click on this button that says Chat, you will see a nice window appear here. For example, if we type hello, you can see how they are already interacting with each other. Nodes, the AI agent, and also the model, this generates a response almost instantaneously. Here, something I really like is that on the right side we have a logs section, which allows us to see what happened during the last interaction. We can see, for example, what the input from the system was and what the output from the AI model was. We also have the option to view the JSON format of this output, and I really appreciate this feature. However, if we go to the chat and say, for example, my name is Hector, it will respond with, hello Hector, how can I help you? But if we ask, what is my name? You can see that the model, as it doesn't have access to past messages, says it doesn't have information on what my name is. To solve this issue, we have a second section called memory. If we click this button, notice that we have different ways to persist messages or store information. Let's select the first option, window buffer memory, which is the simplest one. Here we have some options to configure, for example, what the context window is, that is, how many chat messages will be stored for processing. We'll keep this option at 5. In this simple way, if we again say, my name is Hector, and then ask, what is my name? You can see that it is already remembering. Well, it is using past information to know that my name is Hector. This is how we can persist information and how we can simulate memory as part of the AI agent. The last section we have available is the tools section. This opens a section where we have various tools available that we can use with the AI agent. We may have some like databases such as Notion, for example, to send emails. We have some, for example, like Wikipedia, which does not require any type of registration, is free to use, and does not ask for any parameters. So, if we add this Wikipedia node, we restart the chat section and ask, for example, who was Abraham Lincoln? You can see that the agent is utilizing the tool called Wikipedia. Once again, on the right side, we have the tools, or rather the nodes that were used. You can see that the Wikipedia node was used to query about Abraham Lincoln. So, the query was made, a request was made to find out who Abraham Lincoln is. Based on the information returned from Wikipedia, we already have a summary that has been processed by the AI model. We have some additional tools such as SERP API, which allows us to perform searches on Google, specifically in the search results. You need to configure an account here beforehand. You can register for free, and they give you some monthly credits at no cost. Once we have added this tool, we can search for updated information such as what the travel trends are for the year, for example 2025. This will query. Notice that this SERP API node is used to obtain search results information, and it also generates what the search trends are for that year. It is another way in which we can use a tool. Finally, one of the significant advantages I feel this node or this tool configuration section has is that we can use the HTTP request node or tool. This means that we can basically query any service that has a REST API to retrieve information, generate information, etc. In my case, this tool will help me obtain the script of a YouTube video. How do I do this? Well, basically, I need to fill in the information as if it were a request. In my case, I will indicate that the description of this tool is to obtain a transcript of a YouTube video using the ID as a parameter. This description is very important because it provides broader context to the AI model about what this tool is for and what parameters it needs to function correctly. The method or request will be post. The URL is a URL that I have previously configured for a service that will allow me to obtain the YouTube transcript. As part of the authentication, I indicate that I do not need authentication, but I do need to send a body as part of the request. I indicate that the name of the parameter is this specific name I have copied and pasted, and I want the value to be provided by the model. What does this mean? Well, it will ask us what value we want to pass as part of the chat. We will input it in the chat, and it will process that response to fill in this information automatically, so that it doesn't have a predetermined value, for example. This is a huge advantage that this tool or AI model provides us. Let's return to the canvas then. With this last tool we have configured, let's go back to the chat, and if I say I need the transcript of a YouTube video, notice that it automatically consulted the HTTP request tool, but since it knows it is missing a piece of data to process correctly, it is telling us that it needs the ID of the video. I will now copy and paste an ID from a video, which is one of my videos from my YouTube channel. The tool is functioning here, and if I go to the tool panel, you can see that it is processing my request. This request is being made to obtain the transcript of this video. Perfect! You can see that we have received a correct response. If we go back to the tool, it has finished processing this node and is processing the AI model. The response has been received to generate new content. In this case, it is generating the response. Let's give it a few seconds. Alright, after a few seconds, we can see that we now have the transcript that has been obtained. Since we are using a memory node or buffer memory, we can make some inquiries about the video, such as creating a tweet with emojis to invite people to watch the video. As we have all the information quickly, this is processed and a new tweet is created with the information we have obtained. This is how we can utilize different tools and basically create intelligent agents that use customized tools to obtain and process information using AI models. This is how we have seen a very general way to integrate artificial intelligence into N8n workflows. I hope you find the video useful and enjoyable. If you liked it, remember to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and activate the bell so you receive notifications when I upload new content related to artificial intelligence or how to create applications. See you in the next video.